Hello and welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. We spoke in the last episode about the Four Noble Truths, and they explain why we have suffering, that there is suffering in life, what are the reasons for suffering, what do we do about suffering, and how do we stop it from happening, kind of in a summary. So the Eightfold Path is kind of one of the elements of the teachings of Buddha that explains how we reduce suffering. And that goes into the elements of right viewpoint, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And we're going to go a bit more in depth on these in today's episode. But what I wanted to preface it with is this isn't a checklist, it's more of an integrated way of living, right? So if you've ever kind of wondered about how ancient teachings then translate into our modern personal growth aspect, then this is going to be something that'll connect with you in that space. And when we're looking at the Eightfold Path, it's considered the practical path to liberation from suffering, right? It was first taught from the Buddha or by the Buddha in his first sermon after enlightenment. And as we work through it, we need to look at it, yes, it's a list, but disengage from the fact it's a list, because these 8 steps don't need to be completed necessarily in any particular order. They're better understood just as 8 interconnected practices and ones that we can develop together collectively in those practices over your whole lifetime, right? So you could even think of it as a wheel with 8 spokes. If one spoke of them is weak, then that whole wheel is going to become unstable. So they're all equally as important as each other. And so, yes, we're listed 1 to 8 because that's the way the brain can work it out. But really, when we're applying it, the application is that they all have equal importance and they all need the same amount of focus and work to be able to be integrated. Right. And so at the end, the goal isn't to become perfect. Right. I don't think I have ever met anyone that's perfect. And if anyone tries to tell you that they are, or that they're completely enlightened and that their whole energy body is always completely clear, etc., then what are they doing here in the human body? Because that's not what the human experience is about, right? The human experience is about experiencing. And so we are going to have times where we're going to be suffering from pain. All right, as we talked about in that last episode, there is going to be pain, but the suffering is optional. That's what we can opt out from. So when we're feeling and we're in the space that creates pain, we can have that human experience of going, oh, this is painful. This is bringing up these emotions. Okay, this is bringing up these triggers for these wounds. This is bringing up this aspect I need to look at. Okay, I need to do some healing here, and it's teaching me this, and it's giving me these skills. All of the stuff, right? All the purpose that comes from something painful. But we don't need to sit in that suffering from it, creating stories from it that we're not enough, that we're not able to show up well, that we need to please others for validation, that we're not going to be chosen, etc., right? So the goal isn't to be perfect, but the goal is to cultivate some wisdom. It's to cultivate an ethical way of living your day to day in this human existence. It's to cultivate mental discipline around the way that we focus things and interact with things. It gives us that space of inner freedom and ability to express compassion and have inner peace, right? So ultimately, the Eightfold Path aims to reduce suffering by transforming how we think, speak, act, and relate to the world. So again, it goes back to the only 3 things we can control. Say it with me: the way we think, the way we feel, the way we behave. Right. And so what this does is it gives us a path on different aspects we can work on that help us regain that control over the way we think, feel, and behave. And so the Eightfold Path, even those 8 elements to it, it can be grouped up into 3 main categories, right? And so the first category is wisdom, and that's understanding reality clearly. It's about seeing life without any illusion, and that connects with the right view and the right intention. So those 2 elements of the Eightfold Path. We also have a collective that looks at ethical conduct, which is around how we interact with others. It's about how we're living in a way that's causing less harm for others, because we won't go into it in this episode, but we look at things like karma and all of those sorts of things. So not only do we want to reduce our own suffering, we also don't want to be the bearer of suffering on others, right? So we don't want to cause anyone harm. And that's looking at the right speech, right action, and right livelihood. So those 3 are grouped in there. And then the other group is mental discipline. And this is about training the mind. This is about developing awareness, emotional regulation, clarity, right? This aligns up with right effort is one of them. And then right mindfulness and right concentration. And so there's 8 parts in the space. But as I mentioned before, this isn't a checklist of like, okay, right, we're going to get the right view done. Right now, we're going to go into right intention. Now we're looking at right speech. No. What this is about is there's 8 components on the way that you show up in your life. And if you can actually get to a point where you're considering each of them and doing your best in the way that you show up in each of them, then holistically that is going to lead to you having a life of less suffering. And like I said before, like that wheel aspect, all the spokes. Now, if one spoke falls out, you probably can still ride, right? If another one falls out, depending on where that is, then that's actually going to create instability. And as more of them drop out, you're not going to be able to ride, say, the wheels on a bike. You're not going to be able to ride the bike anymore. And so you're not going to be living a life without suffering anymore. The suffering will come in. So let's go through them. The first one we talked about was right view, under the wisdom category. So understanding reality as it truly is, right? So this goes into understanding the 4 noble truths, understanding that life contains suffering. There is pain, right? And when that pain then is not effectively managed or looked at in the right viewpoint, then it leads to suffering. And if life does have the potential to contain suffering, then suffering has causes and suffering can end. And there's a path that leads to this freedom. So if we're looking at psychology as an equivalent of the way that we're looking at it, we would look at, when we're dealing with our clients, being aware of our beliefs, our cognitive distortion, our unconscious patterns, the stories that we're telling ourselves. And I will often say to some of my clients, asking them, is this a fact or is this a story? Right? So when you're looking at a particular situation that's happening in your life, asking, am I seeing reality right now? Or am I seeing my story about reality? Now, I had an interaction with someone from my past last year about some things that happened when I was a child, and I had conversations with them. And at the end of the conversation, I said to them, I said, look, I appreciate you giving me the time and talking with me today, but my mind sees this under this particular belief system. And so I need to go and spend some time processing and healing that. And then when I repeat this story to people, I very openly say, this is what my brain remembers and how it's interpreted it. Because I very much know that the brain, 2 people can be in exactly the same room, exactly the same situation, and have 2 totally different perceptions about it. They can have 2 totally different memories about it. right? And so I'm very much aware that my brain is sometimes using schemas and things like that to fill in gaps to create the story. And so I will very often try and pick apart that story and ask the question, is this fact or is this story? Is this real or is this what I'm creating? And then unpack that further. Now, if there's patterns involved or different facts involved or things like that that I can grasp to or grab from and build from, then that will give my mind more reinforcement that what it has created is leaning more on the towards the side of fact than it is to the side of story. Now, again, those facts may cause pain, but I don't need to let them cause suffering, right? And so that's where we're going in with the right viewpoint and the right way we're looking at things. This is also looking at, things that are meant for you, you can't run away from. You can't escape. They will find you. Things that aren't right for you, it doesn't matter how hard you grip, they will always fall through your grasp, right? Because they're not meant for you. And so having acceptance of, okay, if something's taken from your life, then there's purpose for it being removed from your life. If something's coming into your life, then there's purpose for it to be coming into your life. And I will often say to myself and especially to my immediate family members that you are exactly where you're meant to be. And I have a very strong belief about that. And that sets up my viewpoint, right? That is the right viewpoint. The right viewpoint isn't the viewpoint of going in and going, oh, bad things always happen to me. I'm going to sit in suffering unless I want to be suffering. Now, for me, I don't. I don't want to suffer. I accept pain. I accept I'm a human and I've got a human experience and I'll go through it. I'll manage the emotions with that. But I want to be in control of my thoughts, my feelings, and my emotions because they're the only three things I can control in life. And so I want to control them. And so for me, it's setting up the right view that allows me to navigate through life and navigate through pain without sitting in unnecessary suffering. So the second one is right intention. So our actions begin with intention. And the Buddha described three wholesome interactions or intentions that we should be doing and looking at. And one is letting go rather than attaching. So being able to detach from things. Goodwill rather than ill will. So you'll often hear in a lot of the work that I do that I will always say never gossip about people, never send people bad energy. I'm very much not a fan of these witchy elements where people will set up intentions like putting people in freezers and in the bottom of their feet and those sorts of things. For me, that doesn't align because that doesn't have the right intention. Right? When looking at karma and things like that, we've got to be careful about the energy we put out because the energy we put out into the world comes back at us multiplied. And so I want to make sure that my intention and what I put out in the world is coming back multiplied at that frequency and some rather than at a negative space of putting intentions out to people to harm people or cause them ill will, which then comes back to me amplified and some. So looking at compassion rather than cruelty. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to accept everything and everyone into your life. What that does mean though is you can forgive people and you can have boundaries on whether you allow them into your life or not. 100%. But if you're going to sit in that space of wishing them ill will, of not letting the situation go, of coming with payback. I mean, these are things that I've done in my lifetime. Not saying I'm perfect, but I've worked on them right to come into this right intention space. So that in itself is causing suffering, even if you don't realize, because the situation of the pain has happened and then you haven't just processed the pain and moved into the next spot. You're reliving the pain every time you think of that situation or every time you try and hurt someone and then they don't get hurt, especially if they're protected, right? Then you're going to get even more frustrated and create more suffering and angst. So the modern equivalent from a psychological perspective, I suppose, looking at this is living intentionally instead of reacting automatically, right? What am I intending for my life? What do I want to create in my life? Do I want to create a space where I'm sitting here ruminating, thinking about other people and thinking badly and meanly about them? Or am I trying to set up a space where I'll actually wish them well and wish them on their way, right? And giving that compassion space instead of the cruelty. And the next one we talk about here is right speech, which is probably one of the most difficult ones that I've had to go through and that I probably think most other people go through. It's easy to have the right view and pull yourself up and go, no, no, shouldn't do that. It's easy to have the right intention and then pull yourself up and go, oh, I didn't really want to think of that person like that. I've got a circumstance that happened where some people did me wrong. And I remember talking to someone the other day about it. And I was like, I don't have ill feelings towards them. I've worked on that and I've processed that and I've let that go when the pain element happened. But their circumstances now probably aren't going to end up well. And a part of me is like, couldn't have happened to a nicer person, right? Not great. One of the things I need to work on as well with my right intention is I find karma really humorous. Now, I'm not wishing people ill will, but when I see something come back as a karmic retribution, I think it's hilarious, right? In that, couldn't have happened to a nicer person kind of thing again. And so I know that that's something I still need to work on. That's, part of being human is we're not perfect. And that's probably my element on right intention. But right speech, that one can be tricky because as a society, when we're looking at molding into society and we're social creatures as humans, we will tend to go with the group, right? Or we tend to behave sometimes in ways that help us become accepted. And so if there's someone gossiping, we can tend to jump in on that. If there's someone, in that space that isn't saying overly nice things about another person, especially if we're not a fan of them, then we might jump in and do that too. But this is also for ourselves, right? And I've said to many people that have really harsh words to themselves is I want you to hear my voice telling you, hey, don't talk to my friend like that, right? Because we have this way of putting ourselves down. Oh, you silly bee. Oh, what a stupid F and C, whatever your words are, right? Usually they're not real pleasant and they're full of expletives and swearing and curse words and that sort of stuff and cussing. So that is again where the right speech comes in. So we have to avoid lying for one of the, that's not the right speech. The energy that comes around lying really isn't great. And if we're lying to someone else, we're putting that energy out, expect it back amplified. Gossip, harsh speech, pointless chatter, all of those sorts of things are things that we should be avoiding if we're looking into showing up with the right speech. And so instead, we want to have our speech being truthful and kind and helpful and timely. And you might have seen some of my content recently, especially on my social media platforms, that's really getting frustrated and creating awareness out of misinformation and mistruths. And even if you're not intentionally being untruthful, and you are normally someone that is truthful and doesn't lie, if you're spreading misinformation, then you're lying. Right. And so this is something that I'm very conscious about one, what that creates at a societal level when people are spreading misinformation and how that impacts the people they're spreading misinformation about. But also, as another thing too, how that then sets up them for not having success because they're putting out lying energy and that's going to come amplified back in. And so one of the things that you can do is before you speak and before you say anything, you can look at asking yourself a couple of questions. So is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And especially after my marriage ended, I remember walking into a room and, I had a family member say to me, oh, how are you? And I stood there, I went, hang on, that's not kind. It's true, but it's not kind. No, I've got to find another way. And they kind of laughed a little bit, but I knew I was sitting in a space where my viewpoint was a little bit skewed because I was still in a little bit of pain and I didn't want to create any more suffering for myself. So I was very careful about how I said things and what I said in that space. There's another, you can download it, I think, and it's actually got think before you speak. And the THINK actually aligns with things. And I had this up on my wall at work for a very long time until it really embedded in my brain. And so the T is truthful, the H is helpful. Is it helpful here? So the I is inspiring. Is it inspiring what you're about to share? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Right? So those, they've added in a couple of other ones there, which is the helpful and the inspiring when you look at think before you speak. And that's a really good way to really evaluate when you're looking at the right speech. Same as when you're talking to yourself. Is this true? Is this helpful? Is this inspiring? Is this necessary? Is this kind? And if it's not, then change it up. Don't speak about it, right? Something can be true and can be unkind. Okay, so how can you look at changing that? Because then when we go back to the right intention as well, right? That's not the right intention to share things that are unkind. You're going to be setting yourself up for non-success in that space. So the next thing is right action. This is living ethically, right? This means avoiding all of the things. And if you have any knowledge or contact with Christianity, they have, the 10 commandments. That's kind of looking at the right action space. Now, whether you agree with those commandments or not, that's up to you. But looking at things in what you think are ethical and avoiding things that you believe are unethical. So again, that kind of lying aspect. But if we're looking at action, this is taking the life of another being. I, often catch spiders and put them outside. I have, a redback that lives on the door of my shed. I'm very happy her living there. And when I disrupt her, I tell her, I'm so sorry for disrupting you. I'm not a fan of spiders. I don't like spiders at all, but I understand they're part of the cycle of life, right? Especially killing another human. This is the one that, as a society, we have said is not great. It also is, when I was younger, we used to go out roo shooting and things like that. I would ask, what is the kangaroo being used for once you shoot it? If you're just shooting it for fun and leaving it there, I don't want to be a part of this, right? Is it going to be used for sustenance? Is it going to be used to preserve life? Are you killing this in a humane way for sustainability, or are you just doing it for enjoyment? Because if you're doing it for enjoyment, I'm out. Right? So looking at that whole killing aspect. Also stealing. If you're taking something that isn't yours, then that's not the right action. Now, again, there's different justifications from this. Oh, it was only a pen. Oh, it was only this. No, no, no. If you're taking something that doesn't belong to you, that is stealing. And it's the same as lying. It doesn't need to be world changing lie. If you're lying, it has that energy against it. If you're stealing, it has that energy against it. Now, remember, oh, would have been, it was before my son was born, so probably early 20s. I remember going, and it was for my engagement party actually, now I remember, and we went in to go get alcohol, and I got a bottle of a carton of Jim Beam cans, Jim Beam and cola, and my fiance at the time had gotten a carton of beer, I'm pretty sure. So as we were going through, they've scanned the beer and that was it. We've gone to pay and I've looked at the price. I'm like, did you scan the beam cans as well? And they're like, oh no, we didn't. So they scanned those and we got outside, and my partner, my fiance, who I'm no longer with, obviously, jumped around and went, why did you say something? That wasn't, they bardy bardy bar, right? You shouldn't have said something. We could have got that for free. And I'm like, oh, now that time I didn't even realize what I was doing. That was just a part of my makeup. That was just a part of who I was. I just didn't steal. Right. Admittedly, when I was a teenager, I stole something just so that I stole something, not proud of it, from a supermarket. I think it was a little makeup case, just because people around me were stealing and I wanted to know what it was like to steal. I didn't like it. I didn't do it again, right? So I have stolen in the past, but again, what's the intent around that? I'm sure that if my family was starving, I would steal food for my survival. Again, looking at what the ethics are around that. Are you stealing something because you're causing harm to someone else, or it's just from a negative program within you, or are you stealing a loaf of bread so that your family can survive? Different levels, but where we can, we avoid it. Sexual misconduct, another one, harming someone else basically at that end of the day. And again, if you have a look at some of my content, very passionate around this, on people that take advantage of other people in that sexual way, especially when it's an adult to a child. I'm not going to say the word minor, they're children, right? And so in that space, that is not setting you up for success either at all. And so more broadly, this means, is my action that I'm doing here now, is this creating more suffering in the world or less? Right? So looking at how your behaviors are and whether they are creating suffering in the world or not. Because if your behaviors are creating suffering, that's not going to end well. And some people, if you look at the world around us at the moment, I know that there's people out there that are creating suffering for others. I know there is. We all know there is. Some are very predominant in the community, I suppose, for lack of a better word. And it feels like there's nothing we can do. But from my belief systems and where I sit, from my Christianity element a little bit and from my energy element, I know that this stuff will have retribution, whether it's in this physical lifetime or not. I don't know. I'm not the one that makes the rules, but there will be retribution for this. And so that the same thing goes for you. There's some people that will live their lives and get away with things and think, hey, it's okay to keep doing this, but nothing will go unpunished at some point in time, in some place, space, in elements. The next is right livelihood. So, do you earn a living in ways that don't create unnecessary harm? Right. So, looking at different ways you can earn money, if you're earning it through slavery or trafficking, sex trafficking, not cool. If you're earning it through killing animals, which is not humane or not necessary, not cool. If you're earning it, I know that most of my money was earned because the company I worked for was connected to mining companies. And I went out and looked at one of the mine sites at one point in time, and my heart was absolutely broken at what it had done to the earth. And there was a beautiful aquifer that ran through. This is up north, right in the middle of the Pilbara, which is really hot. There's not a lot of greenery out and about. And there was this row of trees and greenery, and they were talking about the next stage of that mine. They would have to tap into that aquifer that run through there, which would then reduce the amount of water available for all of the ecosystem that lived off that. And it broke my heart. And I really had to sit in that heavy and look around. Oh my goodness, I'm getting emotional now. And look around and go, is the suffering of other elements worthy of me having this home, these clothes, this car? Now, some people can turn off to it and go, yeah, no worries, I can do that. I'm not one of those people. And so when I did justify it at the time, though, that I needed my family to eat and I needed all these particular things. But I know that I'm going to have to process and deal with the karmic retributions from that. It wasn't that I was doing it directly, but I was still benefiting off the income that was made from that. And a lot of our state does, right? Where I live in Western Australia, a lot of the state's money is propped up from mining. And so our social services are propped up from mining, all of those sorts of things. This goes back then to the intent again. So these are all intertwined, right? They're not separate elements. So if you're right livelihood, when I was doing it, I wasn't happy about it. I looked at ways that I could move away from it. I reflected, I sent the right energy. I tried, even now, I still do earth healing energy work all the time in a way to try and offset that and try and get some karma credits back because I'm not a fan of what where I was and how I made my money. So it was ethical, but was it really ethical? Like it was ethical in the broader sense, but from an energy space, was it ethical? Probably not. And when I came to realize that, obviously, I made the changes. So looking at, does your work align with your values? And does it contribute to not just yourself, but the broader community, environment, etc., in a positive way? The kind of the two reflections you can do to see if you align there. And we got right effort. So this isn't about working harder, it's about directing your energy more wisely. So preventing unhelpful mental states. So looking at positive psychology. I've talked before about the PERMA model of positive psychology, that when we're in our mental well-being space, we're on a spectrum and we sit somewhere kind of in the middle, whoever we are, and we slide up and down. And so what we want to do is we try and keep ourselves sliding up the higher end of the scale and make that our thermostat. So when something happens, we don't fall right back down. We're actually a little bit buffered in that space. So making effort to do things like exercise, like meditation or other mindfulness practices, like enacting the PERMA model of positive psychology, which is positive emotions, engagement, relationships, finding meaning, and finding accomplishment, right? Looking at that sort of stuff. um, Developing helpful qualities that can help the community around us. Big one for me, if you know anything about the work I do. I volunteer for different non for profits that have different aspects, one in road transport safety, one in the homelessness space, one in helping women and girls that are underprivileged. I spend a lot of time putting my energy in spaces and putting my effort in spaces that help, and not only just help me, but help others as well. And looking at intentional mental training, looking at how we're actually going forward. Like I said, the meditation, whether that the mindfulness, what else can you do? Reading really helpful, inspiring books, following the right creators, right? When we're looking at in a world of misinformation, for me, I follow creators that are truth tellers, that go back into history or go deep into the current geopolitical space and pull out the receipts on things that mainstream media doesn't share with us, because I want to have a better understanding. I want to have the right viewpoint, right? So looking at what effort you can make in this space as well. And then right mindfulness, which is probably really well known. Everyone's heard about mindfulness, right? But mindfulness means paying attention deliberately without judgment. Now, this is the thing that a lot of people can't do even within themselves, right? Is do it without judgment. I've worked really hard at this as well. We're not immune. And so it's looking at having awareness when we're looking at ourselves, of our body, of our feelings, of our thoughts, of our mental processes, of the speech that we say to ourselves, of looking at how we talk about others. To me, mindfulness is reflecting on all of those other elements and making sure we're showing up to them in a way that we want to, right? It's not about emptying out the mind, but it is about noticing the mind. It's about picking up on things that we're triggered by and then looking at what are we doing about that? Are we healing? It's about looking at different aspects on how we can create more cohesion in the world around us, more fairness, more equity for people that may not be as privileged as what we are, et cetera, et cetera. And so looking at then without judgment. So you can't judge yourself if something made you feel bad, but what you can do is work on the trigger or the wounding on that so that you can control how you think, feel, and behave moving forward. And then right concentration as the last one, right? So developing a deep mental stability. And this is where meditation comes in for me. Meditation practices that cultivate sustained attention and absorption, right? So learning to focus fully on one thing rather than living in constant distraction. And there are some times where I will meditate where it is really tricky to calm my mind. Like, I'm not diagnosed, but definitely have ADHD traits, right? And I'm sure if I went through the process would be diagnosed at the drop of a hat. And so for anyone else that has this kind of ADHD, it is about not being able to quieten your mind, always thinking, always talking to myself, always doing those things. So when it comes to meditation, I know when I first started, I'm like, I can't do this. I've also had other people going, oh yeah, I can't meditate. Well, what I've learned is if you're saying you can't meditate, then you should be, right? Because the whole idea is getting to a point where you could quiet the mind and regain focus and being able to show your mind that you are in control, that it doesn't control you. And that's where the right concentration comes through. So when we're looking at those sorts of things as well, as I said before, the mental well-being has a spectrum. Everything has a spectrum, right? And if we're looking at our life and where we're doing, we need to find sometimes a middle way, right? So if you're doing everything at extreme, that's not cool either. You know, if we look at Buddha, you know, before he received enlightenment, he experienced both a life of luxury, like he was born in royalty, right? Born into royalty. And then he went away from that. He disowned all of that and then spent years living in poverty and self denial. So he went from one end of the spectrum to the other. And even he's kind of like, oh, neither one of those extreme elements led to the lasting freedom, right? So what we're looking at when we're looking at the Eightfold Path is a path of balance. So not indulgence, not harsh deprivation. Like for me, when we're looking at my job element, when I realized how detrimental to the earth that mining was, if I had have then gone, that's it, I'm quitting my job, then that would have been deprivation. Right. So it was recognizing that and going, oh, okay, now this doesn't feel right. I want to move away from it. And then finding other elements. So it's not, nothing is black and white. There's always gray, but don't also allow yourself to create excuses that put you in a position where you're not following this, and then you fall into spaces of suffering, and then you're feeling like the victim, right? So many, you know, people today as well can swing between being overworked and burnout and having this strict self-discipline, and then also in giving up, you know, and completely withdrawing. And what we want to do is we want to find the middle path. I used to say balance, but I no longer like that. It's the middle path. What is the middle path? Sometimes I'm up there doing that. Sometimes I'm down there doing that. And finding the way that you can have a life that lives both of those. So just in summary, or just to finalize, that path, just to remind everyone, isn't a step-by-step checklist. It's circular, right? And once you do one thing, it actually improves the other. So if you improve your speech, then that improves your relationships, right? If your relationships improve, then your mental clarity improves. If your wisdom improves, then that improves and strengthens your intention, right? So the whole system grows together when you can give it the attention it needs in all of those different spaces. And it's not about being perfect. Far from it. We're humans. We're living a human experience. But it is about reducing suffering, even if that's doing it one choice at a time. So when we're looking at this sort of space, there's also something that I've learned through pranic healing, which is the 5 virtues, which I might throw into another podcast episode, which actually links up and connects with the Eightfold Path, which actually gives different ways that you can enact and operate which align with these aspects here of reducing suffering. And, you know, sometimes this path can be described as training of the head, the heart, and the mind, right? Because it looks at wisdom, looks at ethics, looks at meditation. And when we're looking, even if that number 8, when you're looking at different interconnectedness elements, the number 8 represents 8 interconnected aspects of practice. And if you put that on the side, it's like infinity, right? It's not a sequence of steps. It's actually a way that you can work together and create a practice that can reduce the suffering in your life. Anyway, I hope that has added some value to you, or you've gained value from it. And I look forward to serving you again in our next episode.